Well, it's the annual President's Day holiday in the US, and people across the country are using it to rally against the president currently occupying the White House, Donald Trump. Thousands have turned out in Washington, D.C. against what they see as the president's moves to gut government agencies and make them more compliant. Mr. Trump has said his orders are not breaking law since he is saving his country. A point of view that has many worried that the US is heading for a constitutional crisis or is already in one.
On the campaign trail and in court appearances, Donald Trump was the victim.
They've weaponized your government. They're a disgrace to our country. And I'd just like to exclaim that I was treated very, very unfairly.
Because I did nothing wrong. It's a witch hunt. It's an attack by my political opponents.
Now, in office, he's turned the tables, using the justice system, part of the executive branch of government he heads, to reward supporters and punish enemies. One of his first acts in his new term was to pardon the rioters who stormed the Capitol building 4 years ago, including those who had assaulted police officers. His Justice Department dropped charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. The federal prosecutor in that case resigned, saying the move was an apparent quid pro quo for Adams' cooperation on Trump administration priorities. And the Justice Department has asked for a list of FBI employees who investigated Trump and fired prosecutors who took part in those investigations. Meanwhile, the court system, a separate branch of government, has emerged as his greatest obstacle. Trump's executive orders on freezing federal spending, covering a range of programs, including food assistance for the elderly, have been blocked by courts. The Trump administration has lashed out in response. Vice President J.D. Vance wrote on X, "Judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power." And the White House press secretary said judges were abusing their authority.
Quick news flash to these liberal judges who are supporting their obstructionist efforts. 77 million Americans voted to elect this president. And each injunction is an abuse of the rule of law and an attempt to thwart the will of the people.
One of the cases about Trump's power to fire officials has already reached the Supreme Court, which has a conservative supermajority including 3 justices Trump nominated. But they still might rule against him. If they do, the court has no police force or army to enforce its judgment, leaving many in the U.S. wondering, if Trump loses in court on a major issue, will he do what the court says?
Nancy Erika Smith is an employment and civil rights lawyer. She joins us from the town of Montclair in the US state of New Jersey. Welcome to DW. So we have this storm of executive orders from the White House, some of which are struck down by the courts, leading the White House to protest loudly and angrily. Is this really a constitutional crisis? Because the checks and balances seem to be working at the moment.
Oh, it's definitely a constitutional crisis. Anytime you have one arm of the government, the executive branch and president, completely ignoring the Constitution, it's pretty scary. When the Constitution, for instance, says that all persons born in the United States are citizens, an executive order from the President of the United States saying that's not so is very scary. And a lot of the actions...
The President, forgive me, but the Constitution says one thing, the President says, no, it doesn't. The courts say, yes, it does. Isn't that the way the system works?
Hopefully, so far. Unfortunately, we have a Supreme Court that a lot of lawyers like me have very little confidence in. They're the ones who made up the idea that Trump has immunity from violating the law, which is why we had a revolution in our country. We don't have kings in the United States. So there's very little confidence among lawyers in this Supreme Court. This Supreme Court is the most partisan we probably ever had in history. The Republicans stopped Obama, although he had a constitutional right to add a justice to the court during his last entire year of presidency. They stopped him. And meanwhile, during the Trump administration, they put a Supreme Court justice on the court while there was an election going on. Early voting had already started and Trump lost. And those justices testified under oath that they would not overturn Roe v. Wade. And then they did. And Thomas, more than any other justice, has taken a lot of favors from very connected right-wing billionaires. His wife has actively worked in favor of Trump.
We get the point. That you believe that the system is stacked against you. So the United States, you believe to be in a constitutional crisis. So what does happen if even the Supreme Court says no, but the president says, I'm going to do it anyway? What happens then?
What happens then is pretty scary, because Trump has also violated many other laws and protections, like the Department of Justice is being decimated. So the people who would keep going into lower courts to protect us, they're being fired, or they're resigning because they won't violate the law. So when you fire all the inspector generals, who are created by Congress, the EEOC is an agency created by Congress to stop discrimination in the United States. The NLRB is an agency created by Congress to protect workers' rights. Inspector generals are created by Congress to protect us from fraud and corruption. And the people appointed to those they're confirmed by the Senate. So the separation of powers in the United States Constitution is really important to be honored, and it's not being honored. And if the Supreme Court doesn't stop that, I don't know what happens in the United States. I don't see a great deal of leadership right now.
There's no process, because I was led to believe that you go through the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says one thing, the president says another. The next step, I understood, was an attempt at impeachment.
Yeah, and the Republican Party is in they're completely cowed by Trump. The Republican Party has violated what they said they would do in terms of the incredible appointments to the cabinet. The alcoholics, rapists, anti-vaxxers are in the cabinet now. So the Republicans cannot be relied on. We would have to wait 2 years and have an overwhelming election of
Just
Democrats.
to be clear, there are convicted rapists in the cabinet, you're saying?
Well, Trump is a convicted rapist.
Was he convicted of rape?
Yes, he was. The judge ruled that there's a judge ruling that what Donald Trump did to E. Jean Carroll constitutes rape. There's a judge ruling that.
Okay.
Yes.
So gaze into your crystal ball for us, please, and speculate about the changes likely to have been forced upon the US justice system as a result of 4 years of a president emboldened by the people and by the Supreme Court, who has politicized the administration of the Justice Department. What do you see left in 4 years?
I see Hungary. I see he loves Orban. Trump and his acolytes love Viktor Orban, and they're really parroting what he did to Hungary. You attack voting rights. You fire civil servants who implement the laws and serve the people, not a person. You intimidate the press. Musk said 60 Minutes executives, producers, and journalists should be in prison yesterday because he didn't like what 60 Minutes said. Vance said the president doesn't have to follow court orders. So I see you create division. Orban attacked migrants, which we see happening in this country. You use tons of misinformation, and between Twitter, now Musk's X, and Fox News and Newsmax, there's so much information being pumped into Americans that's what Orban did. And you lie constantly so that nobody can believe anything anymore. You don't trust anybody. It's not just that they want us to believe the lies, it's that they don't want us to trust anything. Saying that migrants are taking benefits. Immigrants don't take benefits. They don't get benefits. Saying that migrants are committing so many crimes. Migrants commit far fewer crimes.
That's quite a dystopian view of the future. Let's cross our fingers and hope that you're wrong. Good talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
I hope so.
Employment and
Thank
Civil
you.
Rights lawyer Erika Smith. Thank you.